The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, thank you for joining today's webcast. Today's webcast by Index Engines is about GDPR. The topic today is supporting GDPR compliance through data classification. My name is Jim McGann. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at Index Engines. I will be your presenter today. We are taking questions if we do have time. You can either type them in the chat area or the questions area on the right side of your screen, or I will put my email address up at the end of the presentation. You can send emails direct, and we will be happy to answer the questions one-on-one. For those of you that are not familiar with Index Engines, we are a software company. We focus on information management. Our platform is high-speed indexing to support large enterprise data centers. Very scalable, very efficient. We have projects that are in the petabytes of data, billions and billions of documents and email. We support unstructured user data as well as data that is in backup formats. So the design of the system is really to support the ability to find, manage, and govern data based on policies. So the GDPR is one of the areas that we are very proficient in and have a lot of clients implementing our technology to support this new regulation. We are located in the United States, in New Jersey, have been in business since 2004. Partnerships with some of the largest technology companies in the globe, including Dell EMC and Amazon, as well as advisory firms. Number of clients include financial services firms, healthcare, manufacturing organizations, and so on. So this session is not going to really cover the details of the GDPR, some of the specifics related to how Index Engines can help, however. But the GDPR is fast approaching. May of next year is the deadline. It's really changing how organizations manage personal data and private data, and it's really putting the ownership of that data back in the hands of citizens. And a lot of the details of it around people's right to access their personal data, correct it, erase it, restrict it, migrate it to new vendors, and so on. The penalties can be severe. It's yet to be seen how they will be enforced, but the regulatory arm of the GDPR has the ability to go up to 4% of revenue or turnover based on non-compliance. So it's really going to require detailed knowledge of data within the enterprise, things like home addresses, email addresses, license plates, anything that can identify individuals and their interest and their data. So specifically, there's about 9 articles. The GDPR itself is about 99 articles. 9 articles, about 10% of them focus on areas where technology platform can really help respond to this new regulation. And the 9 are listed there from Article 15 to Article 35 or so. Really, it's about the citizens' rights of access, erasing, and right to be forgotten, and so on, is rolled up into here, and a number of other areas. So Index Engine's support for the GDPR is ever expanding. The base platform is really broken into 3 areas. We call knowing it, managing it, and governing it. So in terms of knowing it, we talk a lot about classification of data to be able to classify and profile content. We have architected our solution to support enterprise class environments, again, petabyte class indexing technology. And indexing can be performed at a number of different levels. Indexing can be performed at, very high-level metadata level, all the way down to full text content, patterns, regular expressions, personally identifiable information, or PII. We also support indexing of things like ACLs, so access lists and activity logs to see who has access to certain files, who has access to certain files. So if part of the GDPR is supporting things like notification of data breaches and so on, There's tools in the Index Engines platform to be able to look for things like rogue employees or sensitive data that may be accessible by people that shouldn't get access to it, to really kind of proactively head off any of those kind of data breaches. So there's a full reporting, full classification tools to support user files and emails to be able to really put data into specific buckets that can be really defined as very sensitive, or data that may not be sensitive that you may not need to review. Integrated into the platform is a whole defensible disposition solution, so you can delete, copy, migrate data, full integrated archiving and preservation in the platform, and it's defensible in that it has full audit trails. So if users go in to manage data, find a set of content that contains personal or sensitive information and want to archive this data, that activity will be maintained in audit trails and logs that could be referenced in the future. So part of the GDPR is the ability to audit and create monitoring trails, which is the third area here. So these logs are critical to that capability. So the fact that you can automate the management of these policies and you can provide instant access to this data is key to support the GDPR. So the platform, it goes all the way from simple classification and reporting of large volumes of data down to ongoing automation and monitoring of the disposition of that content. So in terms of classification, one of the areas that is very critical is really how you implement a workflow to be able to support the GDPR across petabytes of data, large scale environments. So being able to create automated, what we call data mapping or data classification based on a range of criteria. And data mapping is largely based on obviously the interviews and working with IT organizations to understand the data environment. But we feel there's a lot of classification that Index Engines offers to be able to support a more intelligent data mapping process. And classification of content really to look for highly suspect areas or hot zones of data that contains personal information, may contain personal information, and really to kind of create those targets for simplified audits. So one of the examples here that we can talk about is if you use Index Engines to really analyze Active Directory groups. So Active Directory are really your departmental organizations within your firm. So for example, client services team or the HR team are members of an Active Directory group that is already set up within your organization. So being able to filter by that group and say, I want to find all members of, for example, the HR or human resources team. And then you can use Index Engines to take that classified group of data or data set, and then use metadata filtering on that to look for typical documents that would contain personal information, such as Word documents or email. There may be spreadsheets. There may be other specific file types that would contain that information. So you can create that policy, and then you can tag that data for easy access into future queries, and then go deeper into that content, looking for personally identifiable information or looking for specific keywords that are of interest. So the idea is if you take a large data environment, which most organizations have, and start filtering it by more intelligent queries and intelligent criteria, it takes a large challenge and simplifies it significantly, so you can create very highly tagged or classified data sets that would be hot zones for personal information. One of the areas that is very common with customers facing requirements around the GDPR is cleaning up data. So it's really a best practice that is evolving, is that if you have significant volumes of data, executing a ROT analysis or a ROT data cleanup, ROT standing for redundant, obsolete, and trivial content, will take the job of managing large volumes of data and significantly reduce the volume of data that really has no business value that should be cleaned up anyway. So if you're trying to find the proverbial needle in the haystack, the idea of making the haystack smaller, which makes the job of finding the needles much easier. So cleaning up rot is one of the areas that's really being tied to the GDPR regulation. And a lot of the index engines clients that we're dealing with are engaging in this process currently to start cleaning up their data center and cleaning up decades of content that exists on user shares and filers that exist out there. And we're seeing across the board that through rot cleanup or defensible deletion, you can really clean up anywhere from, if depending on how aggressive you are, 30 to 60%, 40% being a safe number of network data that's out there. A lot of the stuff that's aged out, a lot of redundant content, a lot of stuff that's trivial, maybe user generated log files that have really no value to the business, or personal data, which could be vacation photos and downloaded movies and videos. So the idea is, if using classification, which is going to help support obviously the GDPR, but using it to do a rot analysis allows you to find this redundant content, age content, most customers looking for data that has not been accessed in more than 3 years, for example. Separating out from age content, we can talk about abandoned data. And because we're connecting to Active Directory with index engines, you could find data that are in a ex-employee bucket, or inactive employee bucket. So those are users that are no longer with the organization, and their data that's out of the network is what we call abandoned. Non-business multimedia files, vacation photos, iTunes libraries, things like that, or trivial content, log files, personal vacation photos, things like that. So being able to create those classification buckets, you'll be able to profile that content and see what your number is. Is it 40% of that content that could disappear tomorrow and no business users or no business regulatory holds or requirements are on that data? And then you can execute a defensible disposition. So if you're not really excited about deleting content, and most organizations really love to save everything or have save everything strategies, you can migrate it to cloud, for example, get it off the primary storage and migrate that, non-active or data that has no business value or may have business value, but no legal hold or no regulatory requirements on it. Why not move it off the primary network into the cloud, which would be much less expensive, takes it out of the backup environment, so you're not backing it up and replicating it, takes it out of the network environment, so it allows you to help find and search for data related to the GDPR much more easily. And cloud is inexpensive. You could delete content or purge it if you're of that mindset, and many organizations are purging data that does not have business value. Maintaining a full audit trail. Part of the GDPR regulation, is the inclusion of a data protection officer, which needs to put in these audit trails and these processes in place. And part of it could be this cleanup process, maintaining logs of actually why data was purged and showing that it didn't have business value. Or you can archive non-active data that does have personal information. So you may have regulatory or legal hold requirements of data that contains personal information. You could archive it in a searchable repository so that it's there if needed and can be searched and found very quickly. So the beauty of the Index Engines platform is that you can classify data and develop different disposition strategies, whether it be deleting, defensible deletion, whether it be migration to cloud tiers or new different storage tiers, or whether it be archiving and preserving data in a legal hold or a long-term retention environment. So this screenshot is based on the Index Engines outputs. This is using some reporting tools. This is not the Index Engines interface, but it's output generated from the Index Engines software that shows typical dashboard of content, kind of looking at your data environment and creating either a data health audit or data assessment on the content. There's a lot of information here. A lot of folks like to use this at a senior executive level to help sell the ability to classify and manage data. And organizations that kind of get into that whole analysis paralysis of where do you get going, where do you get started in terms of managing data and supporting things like the GDPR or other regulations. These kind of dashboards are helpful just to have a common language or a common view into the data. So this is just an example. The flexibility of the index engine's reporting output is vast, and you can create many different views into the content. But one of the areas is looking at the capacity by department. So here you can see, looking at the percentage breakdown by different organizations in the business, how much data are different groups using by percentage of servers, by capacity, by number of files. And I guarantee you, every customer that we do this with, when they start looking at this, really have no understanding of who's using the most data and how many files exist. We have clients that would predict they have tens of millions of files on specific servers. When we do an index of that content and classify it, we find billions of files. So they're off by hundreds of times magnitude in what actually exists. And actually, some customers are using this. This is for chargebacks. So being able to look at what different departments are using in terms of resources in the data center, and implementing chargebacks, so they're incented to really say, hey, why am I spending this much money for my data center resources? And you can show them, it's like, because you're using 28% of the entire capacity of what's out there on the network. So looking at capacity as a high-level drill down, and then going further, looking at abandoned data. As I mentioned earlier, abandoned data is data that's owned by ex-employees. So here you can see abandoned data broken into two buckets: abandoned data that was accessed in the past year. So the owner of that file may not exist, but other users on the network are actively using those files. So that's interesting. So you don't really want to pull that out from other users because there's value in that data. Or you can say abandoned data that hasn't been accessed in more than a year, and break that down by department. So you can see within the financial services department, there's a large volume of abandoned data that has not been accessed. You may want to review that to see if there's any intellectual property or value in that, or just go ahead and purge that content because no one will be missing that data. And financial services team is something that would contain a lot of personal information. So proactively cleaning this up and looking at that data will help support the GDPR policies. Email audit is also very interesting. Looking at, in this example, looking at where PSTs are. So a lot of users may be creating PSTs in the network that would be chock full of personal data. And if you say the PSTs that are created by the HR team is something that's very interesting for me, and you can see there's a large chunk of those out there. Let's look deeper into those. So getting a visual view into that allows you to create these hot zones of where personal data may be stored. Looking at active data, stuff that's been accessed the last year, you can figure out how to optimize your storage network and really find out where the live working data is. And this area, ROT analysis, is looking at, as I mentioned earlier, redundant, obsolete, trivial content. And you can break that down by department. And here looking at trivial files, which are maybe log files, videos, photos, music files, and so on. So these types of charts are great visual tools to really create a working environment internally between the IT organization and the records or the regulatory folks that are responsible for things like the GDPR regulation, to really get a profile and understand what exists. Now, what these different reports, you can drill down into them and get actual more details, or modify them, or tweak them so that you can get them very fine-tuned, and then you can get detailed file listings, and then you can execute a disposition policy on top of that. So some of the features, Index Engine is very rich in terms of the reporting and classification features. As I mentioned, it is designed to support large-scale environments, petabyte class environments. We have projects that are in the tens of petabytes out there in terms of indexing, and the fact that the index footprint is only 1% of the data size means that it's very scalable. You don't need a large number of servers and hardware platforms out there to be able to support large data center environments. Also supports federated search and reporting for distributed data, very high-speed indexing, reaching up to speeds of 1 terabyte per hour per indexing node. I mentioned Active Directory integration. That's very powerful to be able to support doing filtering and reporting based on departments and organizational groups within any company. Full tagging to be able to classify and tag data based on any kind of criteria. And then the power of the index engine itself is really the flexible queries and reporting options. From metadata, full text, Boolean search, searching for patterns, things like bank routing numbers, full regular expression capabilities, POSIX-based and extended capabilities. So you can get very detailed. We're also re-releasing shortly the ability to do conceptual search. So you can teach the index engines what personal data looks like or what documents look like that would contain suspect personal data, and the index engines can be able to find that content. Also can index security, access control lists like read, write, browse permissions of files. So a lot of what's within the GDPR is to support notifications and so on, and what happens with a data breach. Why not start understanding what people have access to, what sensitive content exists on the network, who has access to it. Maybe it's rogue employees that are out there browsing and finding sensitive content, or it's sensitive data that really doesn't need to be out there that many people have read, write, browse permission for. Or looking at the activity logs to see who's been accessing certain files. If there's lots of access of sensitive data by folks or users that do not necessarily need to have access to that, that's the kind of cleanup that should happen that'll help really prevent any kind of sensitive data breach out of your firewalls. So very rich classification features within the platform. These are the few of the ones that relate to the GDPR. Many others exist. This is actually screenshots of the index engine's interface. We're not doing a demonstration today. This is as close as you'll see. But a lot of these are the reporting tools that are in there. Again, any of the reports can be output to other reporting tools, as you can see in the previous example, to be able to get more graphical views into the content. So the personal data and the GDPR requirements, again, this gets very complex in how GDPR defines personal data. It's very vast and it's very, very sophisticated. So it really requires, comprehensive search and reporting. Unfortunately, a lot of the tools that have been used for things like e-discovery or e-disclosure, the forensic tools really don't have this depth of search and depth of reporting against large volumes of data. But how GDPR requires or defines personal data is anything that can really be used to identify a person. So obviously name, some identification number, online identifier like an IP address for your computer, genetic information, economic information, anything that can be used to identify an individual, and that could be vast. Then it goes one level further, talking about sensitive personal data. So that could be your ethnic origin, your political opinions, religious beliefs, everything related to that defines you as a person, trade union membership, for example. So it's very vast. So what we've been gearing up to is to be able to support different queries and search criteria that would support any of these types of personal data inquiries. Everything from keyword search by name and address, obviously, to pattern search, looking for things like bank routing and information. Social Security and credit card numbers, not necessarily part of the GDPR, but if you're doing these kind of classification, can help support these other regulations that are require management of this data. Regular expression, as I mentioned, looking for postal codes, license plates, UK bank sort codes, email addresses, things like that, that are, could be different by different geographies or different countries, different vendors, a Gmail account versus a Hotmail account, so on. And then the concept search, as I mentioned, is something that's coming to market very quickly, that you can train the index engine, query engine, to identify what personal data looks like, what a document looks like that would contain personal data. So being able to create very vast and flexible queries into this content, and combining these queries with Boolean parameters, like finding somebody's name near any of these types of things like postal codes and so on, that would help identify it. So the idea is within the query platform is to create very sophisticated and complex queries that can be stored and run on any scheduled basis or run as required to help identify personal data that would exist on the network. Another screenshot that's an example of reports that are generated, looking at more departmental drill down. So again, in the GDPR, instead of looking across all different departments, possibly within the legal organization versus marketing, marketing team may not deal with any personal data. So you can really kind of put that on lower priority and kind of focus on the legal data and looking at content based on certain criteria, documents that may contain PI and location of that, for example. So these kind of reports can be created, stored, and run on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to help perform these audits and help locate and identify personal data to be able to manage that content. Another major component for the GDPR is obviously security assessments, being able to basically support the notification and management of data breaches. So obviously what every organization would love to do is to be proactive and avoid data breaches because the cost of them obviously are significant. But using a classification platform like index engines, you can perform ongoing security assessments really to help find the sensitive data and manage it proactively. So the volume of the sensitive data that exists on the network is significant, and really managing it and controlling that data and getting it into secure archives that are monitored and managed and provided access to only those that really need to access that sensitive data is key. So some of our capabilities for index engines is being able to find this data, which we've been discussing, but using activity logs to determine who has accessed this content, really looking for things like rogue employees, which is one of the major components of data breaches is from the inside, finding those employees that are out there to undermine the organization. Looking at access control lists or ACLs to determine who has read-write browse permission for sensitive content, and proactively cleaning up this data so that it's not going to breach the firewall, and clean up access to specific content proactively. So there's a lot of tools in there, not only to be able to manage personal data, but to really start looking at the security of this content and determine how you can proactively support any kind of, spearhead any kind of data breach. Defensible disposition obviously is getting data where it needs to be. So the core of the GDPR is citizens' right to access data, correct it or rectify the data, erase it, restrict it, migrate it to a new vendor, for example. Timeframes are defined to accomplish this, in meaningful timeframes. Otherwise, there's potential fines. So, within the index engines is integrated disposition. So it's not really simply a reporting and a classification platform. All the disposition of the content is fully integrated within the interface so that you can find it for editing, find it to it for exporting out to citizens, migrate and archive it to cloud storage, for example, if it needs to be preserved and retained for some long-term retention or other regulatory requirements that can be done quickly. Deletion is built into the platform as well, deleting content. There's also a built-in archive to be able to archive and restrict access to data. So the disposition of content is built into the index engine platform. So once the classification is done or any of the queries that are required are completed, disposition is very easy to perform. So what we're seeing, and your workflow may vary, obviously, is what we're seeing in terms of workflow with index engines is really to generate first pass on metadata classification. As I mentioned earlier, looking at data and putting it into buckets. Some buckets may have highly suspect or hot zoned for personal data. Other buckets may be stuff that can be avoided or put in a back burner and said, typically we won't find personal data in these environments. So if you've got a data center that is managing, petabytes of content, you can put it into these classification buckets that would be much smaller and much easier to manage. So first pass doing metadata classification, including metadata classification into data mapping interviews. So if you've done this first pass and have very rich reports, as I showed you earlier, that define and profile the data, as you're going into your data mapping interviews, you could use this content for a very intelligent perspective as to what exists. So data mapping is definitely a part of the GDPR to ask questions and interview business stakeholders and IT organizations to help get a more detailed understanding of the data profile. The third phase is defensible disposition. Go purge and clean up everything you can. And once you've classified content and gone through that effort, there'll be obvious data that really has no business value. So purging it and getting it off the network will make the task of supporting the GDPR regulation much easier. Defensible deletion is definitely a key component to this workflow. Then the second pass classification is really identifying these personal data zones or these hot zones and finding where they are, and then going into a deeper analysis of that content. So using the more sophisticated search capabilities that all the way down to the conceptual search to identify personally identifiable information. So the process here is going from a very high level view of content down more detailed into very sophisticated or detailed view of data that can contain personal information. And then tagging this personal data for easy access, putting it into an archive, putting it into repositories or keeping on the network and keeping it tagged so that you can easily find this content and respond to the GDPR inquiries very quickly. So that's the kind of workflow that we're seeing is going from a very high level view into a very detailed view of the content. As I mentioned earlier, ongoing monitoring and automation is part of the regulation. So monitoring compliance and so on is key. So you need to really be able to show compliance with the GDPR through the use of technology. So we are within index engines, the ability to build policies and to automate these policies is core to the platform. So the ability to show those policies and show how they're automated is something that's very easy to do. We use what we call store queries. Queries are your policies, so you can say find data that fits this profile and store that and name that so that it can be run at any time or run through automation. They can be run on a scheduled basis. You get email notifications of the results of these queries. You can output this stuff to text files and use third-party reporting tools, as I demonstrated earlier. You can automate indexing and automated archiving and preservation of content. And then all this activity is maintained through logs and audit trails. So you'll have all that as an audit trail that can be used. When the regulatory folks come knocking and say, show me your audit trails and show me your policies and show me what's been done and why it was done. All that's built into the platform. One of the areas we wanted to talk about today also is backup data. So a lot of organizations out there have been creating data for disaster recovery, which is a normal business practice, but then archiving this backup data, possibly to backup tapes and putting it in offsite storage. So if you start reviewing, and there's a lot of conversations online about this, if you start viewing the regulation or the GDPR requirements, it talks about any operation or set of operations which is performed on personal data, such as collection and storage of the content. That's basically backup. That's what backup is doing. So if you read that and review those statements within the regulation, it's also referring to this backup data. So customers and organizations that are keeping stockpiles of legacy backup on tape or on disk, that's going to be part of the regulation. So how are you going to apply these queries against that data? Fortunately, index engines can perform the same indexing and classification across backup data as well. The only solution on the market that can do that. So if you're looking at being able to support the GDPR on your network data and also your backup data, you can use the same policies and classifications that are created across both data sets. We highly encourage as a best practice for customers to go tapeless and start cleaning up those tapes. A lot of the content that's on those tapes has no business value. It's aged, definitely aged data, definitely redundant data. We can clean that up. We can migrate the data of value to an online archive. Possibly the cloud is a good price point for that, and allow you to eliminate those tapes and create a secure indexed archive of the data of value, and allow you to support the regulatory request. So again, anybody looking to support the GDPR, you need to look at your backup tapes and your legacy backup data, and we can help you do that and to get that content in order. So wrapping up here, I know we're pretty much at the end of our time here, but there's really three components to what Index Engines delivers today. At a high level, the ability to know what you have, provide insight into your enterprise data, to manage it accordingly, allow for streamlined disposition of that content, get the data where it needs to be, and to support policy, to take control of data, to support governance and policy from either security, assessments and management, or legal and regulatory requirements like the GDPR. We do have a GDPR guide that's available. If you send me an email, my email address is on the screen right there, and I will get it out to you later this afternoon. Or just reach out to us if you wanted to go further to understand what Index Engines offers in terms of product capabilities, or to see the product in action. We'd be happy to demonstrate it. We have a number of partners that we work with that provide legal and advisory support around the GDPR. We can connect you with those organizations as well. But if you do have any questions, I think we're definitely short of time. Reach out to me and we'll get you to the right folks. We do have representatives in Europe as well as the US and as well as Asia that can help support these regulations and help you understand how Index Engines can manage your data more effectively. Again, we're out of time, so we're going to cut it short here. If you do have questions, my email address is there. If you'd like to get a copy of this guide or a copy of the slide deck, send me an email and I will send that out to you very quickly. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it, and we'll look forward to talking to you in the next few days.